Union Point update. John Tewig, New England Development, Brookfield Properties. Thomas Henderson, Chairman, Southfield Redevelopment Authority, Board of Directors. Kelly O'Brien McKinnon, Southfield Redevelopment Authority, Rockland Representative. So just for some of the members of the audience, I would just advise for tonight's meeting anyway, this is the first time that as a board we're hearing anything about this project as far as where we are in this project and what the plans for the development are. This is the presentation to the Board of Selectmen. So if you have any questions, as I mentioned to Doug this morning, just jot it down, and there are going to be plenty of public open sessions with the public, informational sessions where I think would be more appropriate time for those questions to be asked. I'd like to give the board as much opportunity to ask as many questions as they might have in this case. All right, and without any further ado, take it away, guys.
Mr. Chairman, Tom Henderson, the Chairman of the Southfield Redevelopment Authority, the Rockland appointee. I'm here with Kelly O'Brien McKinnon, the other joint appointee for the SRA. Normally would be with us is the joint appointee for the residents, which is David Rubin, the Vice Chairman, but he's traveling for his job. He's an airline pilot. So thank you for having us here. Before I introduce the developer, just a quick overview. We haven't been here in a while, and certainly look forward to tonight. A lot of good news, and there's going to be a lot of information about where we've come from, where we are now, and what we're looking for in the future with a great development team. So just quickly, we selected Brookfield Properties and New England Development in January of 2020, just prior to COVID. We went through an extensive RFP process. We had 2 applicants. One applicant was really looking to do piecemeal development, but the applicant we chose, Brookfield Properties and New England Development, they have a vision to develop the entire base, not just one town, but all 3 towns, which is important to us as the Rockland representatives. So we've had to do a lot of work. We've had to take a lot of pieces of the base apart and rebuild them and put them back together, and you'll hear about that tonight. There's a great board at the SRA, really encouraged about the progress that's been made to date, and I can see the future with this development team is just going to be good for all 3 towns and the region as a whole. So I'll turn it over to Kelly if she has any words, and then we'll turn to the development team.
I think Tom actually said it all for me as well. We have a great board. We've worked really hard to get to where we are now. We've been through a lot over the last few years in order to get here as well. So we look forward to the presentation tonight and the support of the board as well as the town as we move the project forward.
And as I introduced the first person, John Tewig, I just want to say him and his whole team, they are truly a team built to take projects that have been in problems like Union Point or Southfield and turn them around into great projects. And that's why I'm encouraged to hear their presentation tonight and continue to support them. And I hope that the community as a whole can support them moving forward. So John, I turn it over to you.
Mr. Chairman, good evening. My name is John Tewig. To my left is Paul Sincata. We're with New England Development. Also with me tonight, and I'll introduce them in a few minutes, Tony Green, who worked with us on our Pine Hills project down in Plymouth, and also Robert Pierce from Brookfield Properties. So that's sort of our team that we brought with us tonight. We do appreciate the opportunity to be able to spend some time with you. We're going to ask for your indulgence in advance because this is the first time we have been here. So we're going to go through some information and some background because we think it's very helpful to understand sort of where we've been. As Tom mentioned, we've certainly enjoyed our work with the SRA, but we were appointed right before COVID. Literally about 30 days before, so timing is everything in life. Wasn't great timing for us, but we're going to talk to you a little bit tonight about sort of what we've been doing since that time. Why has it taken a little bit of perhaps more time than anybody expected? Tell you a little bit about who we are because we think it's helpful and who our team is. So, as I mentioned, myself, Robert, Tony, and Paul are probably the four people you'll see the most of. We have a consultant team that is a team that we've worked with for a lot of years, some 25 years or more. Our master planner is Ricardo Dumont. He's made some of the presentations that we've made publicly. Ricardo's a great planner and thinker about what space should be. Our technical site civil is Tetra Tech. Bob Daler Bob is actually a native of Rockland and someone I've worked with for about 30 years. Great thinker on infrastructure, water, sewer, stormwater. Transportation, Jeff Dirk, Finesse and Associates. Jeff is probably considered one or two of the best traffic engineers, certainly in the Commonwealth. We hired a firm called RKG, and we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. RKG, we first met years ago. They do mostly work for the Commonwealth and for municipalities. We actually hired them to come and look at the existing development in Weymouth, also look at Rockland, look at Abington as to what future development might be and to do an analysis of sort of revenues and costs. So we're going to talk a little bit, again, on a very high level. They've issued a report, which we can get into in another opportunity. And then also Tim Sullivan, who you also hear from tonight, is our permitting lawyer who has worked on the zoning. Because remember, what we're really bringing to the community is a request for a zoning bylaw. So that's sort of a little bit about who our team is and who you're going to hear from, at least a couple of us tonight. So our agenda. No, we're not going to go through all of this, but a little bit of, again, who our team is, sort of what we've been doing since site selection. I think it's important that you know that because it involves sort of land and our negotiations with the Navy and sort of what we've been doing, because it absolutely impacts how Rockland would think about this project. A little bit overall sort of timeline and process. We want you to know sort of where we're at, what we envision going forward. A little bit of vision. I talked to you about what we see about the base. Ricardo, if he were here tonight, would give you a more involved presentation, which we certainly can do in the future, but we're going to touch on that. Tim's going to give you a little bit of zoning 101 about what we're doing and talk about most of the zoning that exists there today and what's been built. We're leaving that zoning alone, but as to the part that hasn't been developed, we're going to create a new overlay district to deal with that. We're going to touch very briefly tonight on some of the technical studies, some of the information that we've been looking at, talk a little bit about sort of benefits and next steps, and then available, obviously, to your board for any questions. So that's our hope tonight. Doug was kind enough to put us at the end because he said we could take as many hours as we wanted to go through this. We're not going to do that, but it will take a little bit of time to give you this background, and we do think at the end, hopefully you'll agree, it's helpful. I'm not going to read any of this, but New England Development. Who's New England Development? New England Development is a company that was founded about 40 years ago by our chairman, Steve Karp. We were originally a regional shopping mall developer. Most of the Simon malls that you go into in New England, we built. We sold those to Simon about 20 years ago. Probably built a little bit more today than 50 million square feet of space. We're primarily commercial developers. We're going to show you a couple of projects that we've done. Right now, we've got about $4 billion of real estate in the pipeline in different places in Boston, Cambridge, and otherwise. Here's one of our projects, University Station. Why do we show University Station? Well, it's right off of 128, Amtrak, commuter rail. The relationship to Union Point is this was a failed project where hundreds of millions of dollars had been sunk and nothing had been developed, that all the permits and approvals didn't work. So it has, unfortunately, relationships and similarities to Union Point. It was a project that we had to take hold of. We ended up buying it through, eventually, the Irish government, because the Bank Anglo-Irish had failed. A pension fund that had supported it had lost, again, you can see the similarities as it relates to Union Point, because this was a Carpenter's pension fund failure, where they had lost about $100 million of actually small college pension funds for teachers. It was a terrible thing that they invested in this. Those are the monies that were lost. We took it over, redid all the permitting, worked with the community, moved it forward, created about 2 million square feet. We just actually last week did a transaction with Dana-Farber. They're going to build their new brain cancer center there. Citizens Regional Headquarters are there. We brought Wegmans to Massachusetts, if you know their supermarket chain. This is anchored by a Wegmans and a Target. We put housing here and built housing in the development. We have 2 hotels, one which has been constructed, Courtyard Marriott, another one that we're doing. Really turned this site, which was, when I was little, an old GM engine plant. That's what actually was on this site, and then turned it into what it is today. But again, I reference it because of its similarities actually to Union Point. Not necessarily all good because of the history of it, but I think important. It's the type of thing that we do. We've spent 10 years on this project. We got it in 2012. We're over 10 years. We're into year 11. That's a project Paul and I have worked on for a lot of years. A second project, which is just to give you a sense, is Cambridge Side. Cambridge Side is, if you know it at all, it's near the Charles River. It was very cool when we did it because it was 3 levels down and 3 levels up. We did it between 1987 and 1990. I was but a child back then, a young lawyer who was working on this. It was anchored by a Sears. It also had, I'll really date myself, a Lechmere, if anybody ever bought their first camera at a Lechmere, and actually had a Filene's, I'll date myself again, but great stores. When you look at it today, we had to reimagine it because a lot of things have happened in regional shopping centers today. The Sears is now a life science building. We went into the life science business about 5-6 years ago. That's now a life science business building. We took down, Filene's had become Macy's. We took down the Macy's building, and in October we'll be opening about a 360,000 square foot office and lab building in that location. We revamped the 3rd floor and made it into a company called Smart Labs, which is it's sort of the WeWork of the lab business in the sense of where people have, and it's people like Bristol Myers Squibb and Pfizer who are developing new drugs, but they want small amount of space because it's still in an incubation stage. And we've still kept 400,000 square feet of retail, and where the Lechmere used to be, we're building a couple of hundred housing units. So it gives you a sense of sort of what we do in the mixed-use nature. We're building 1 million square feet of lab and office space, plus the residential, but still keeping a lot of core retail. So that's a project that we've done. Another project that you're probably familiar with, Pine Hills, was another New England development project. About over 3,000 acres, about 2,500 residences are built. This was primarily a residential project, does have some commercial nature, but it is, we put it in the various projects that we've done because it gives you a sense of sort of the type of things that we have done. So that's a little bit about New England development. We've always been based in Massachusetts. We found New England is a very parochial place. If you're not sort of from here, people don't necessarily warm up to you. That's why we did regional shopping centers on the line. Brookfield. This is a joint venture with Brookfield. Robert is here tonight. We're very excited about being able to partner with them. Depending on the day, they're either the largest or second largest real estate company in the world. Their real estate assets, I think, as he told me, are really now at $250 billion. They've done a lot of commercial space, a lot of apartments, a lot of projects under construction, a lot of master planned communities, but they're not really have done them here, so we're joint venturing with them to bring this. It's a highly resourced company, knows, and is very similar to how we look at things in mixed-use developments, understand office, understand lab, understand that. A couple of sample projects for them, a local one, University Park at MIT, and then in South Carolina, a much larger project than we would do here, but give you a sense of one of their master plan communities. So that's Brookfield. Okay, it's a little bit about who we are. What have we been doing? As was mentioned by Tom, we're probably focused on 4 things. Land ownership, which you'll say, okay, what about that? But I'll explain it in a minute. Coordination with the Navy. Remember, this is a Navy BRAC site. It's still controlled much by the Navy, and they're responsible for cleaning up. Resetting a redevelopment plan. There's been a redevelopment plan on this base since the late 1990s that had to be modified. And then creating a zoning to implement that redevelopment plan. But let's start with the first one, which I think will explain. We affectionately call this the Humpty Dumpty plan. When we inherited this in 2020, what was controlled by Washington Capital Management, which is an agent of the Carpenters Union, was what you see in yellow. That's what they controlled. That's what they foreclosed on. What you see in the light pink, which is labeled L-Star Southfield, was in fact what L-Star still owned. Unfortunately, Washington Capital did not have a mortgage on and did not end up controlling everything that you see in the light pink. And not only is it the land heavily in Abington and heavily in Rockland, but it's also the roadway network that you see up in, someone has called this sort of our hot pink color. The hot pink that you see there is really that which has been developed. If you went out there today, it's where people live, and it's sort of, oh, thanks, Paul, where people are, so that's that. But the light pink color here, over in here, including in Rockland, the roadways, the sewer and water infrastructure was still owned by L-Star, a defunct company that had been foreclosed on by Washington Capital. Then you sort of have the Navy piece, sort of the purple that's here. We call this affectionately the teapot piece, and then some other parcels that they had. Then you had Southfield Redevelopment Authority controlling some land, and then you had what was called the U.S. Coast Guard piece, where Coast Guard had housing. So when we inherited this, all we really had control of was what was in yellow. Now, there are many problems with that. There's all kinds of turtle habitat and other habitat that's down here that is the subject of natural heritage permits. When we met with Natural Heritage, when we met with the state, they said, well, who owns and control that? Because no great surprise, L-Star had defaulted on that. They defaulted on the escrow payments. They had defaulted on the work that was supposed to be done. So we spent some time talking to the state, but the bottom line is it wasn't controlled by anyone except by L-Star. There was absolutely sewer infrastructure that needed to be repaired, but it was controlled by L-Star, which couldn't be done to service the community. So that started us on a process to think about how do we gain control over that which is in pink? How do we advance our issues with the Navy? How do we do the Coast Guard? I'll do the first two things. The Coast Guard went to auction. Actually, General Services Administration put it out to auction. There are about a dozen different bidders on it. As you might imagine, most of those bidders were not concerned about what happens to the base or what the future of the overall plan was, or how they can move in, do something with that land. We ended up supporting the SRA, where the SRA actually purchased that property, and we have an agreement with the SRA that that can come to us as master developer. So that was one piece, they actually purchased it out of the auction. The second piece was how do we get a hold of the L-Star land? Now, this land isn't really of value. I mean, it's restricted land, not necessarily development value, highly encumbered, failed infrastructure on it, but controlled by someone who no one had any control over. So, eminent domain. At the end of last year, the SRA, with our support and also Washington Capital support, was able to take by eminent domain all the land that you see in sort of the light pink, which suddenly meant that everything in light pink, all the infrastructure could be under SRA control, and again, could ultimately come to the control of the developer. So when you look at that plan, if we go to the next one, you see two plans. Our Humpty Dumpty plan that I just sort of went through, and then the plan on the right. And why the plan on the right is mostly the light blue colors, everything in light blue, remember the sort of the hot pink is that which has already been developed, whether it be the recreational center or housing units or what, the 1,274 residences that are there. But everything in blue is controlled by the Navy, the SRA, or us, including the Coast Guard piece up here, the L-Star land down here. So that under our agreements, we can actually develop everything in light blue. So when people say, well, what have you been doing in that period of time, is we couldn't do anything with this. We absolutely can do something with this. We can put zoning on this, we can finish and redo the state permits, we can move it forward through MEPR and the state permitting process, we can actually make a development. But that only happened at the end of last year. So that's probably, if you ask, what is the one single biggest thing that we've been working on, working with the SRA, your representatives on the SRA have been absolutely great, is trying to create that opportunity. So that's sort of the first thing. Second thing was the Navy, and I'm not going to read the words here. But the Navy, I mean, this is a Navy site. The Navy is owed money. The Navy gets an annual payment every year. We actually made the last one in March. In March of this year, we created, and been working with them for over a year, an opportunity. That money would go into the Navy would then get sent down to Washington, D.C., and as we all know, any monies that go to Washington, D.C., where do they go? The Navy has agreed and signed an escrow account, and our latest payment has gone into it, that they will allow those monies that they're due, and the monies for the base, to fund a dewatering facility to deal with PFAS on the site, and that all the monies now and in the future that are due the Navy will stay on the base site. That doesn't sound like much, But to get the Navy to agree to do that so that we could move this project forward and cooperate with us, keeping their obligations for the cleanup, to be able to, and we're in plant design right now, was a huge step. And also reaching understanding with the lots that I mentioned to you, the teapot lot and the like, are coming to the SRA and ultimately to us. So that was a big sort of second piece that we've spent in coordinating with the Navy. The next piece, if we could go to a redevelopment plan. The word plan is a little bit of a misnomer. It's more of a narrative. It's a narrative that's required by the state. And it talks about the history of the site. It talks about the various land uses, open space. You have to do a fiscal analysis attached to that. You have to outline what we're going to do with water and wastewater and stormwater and traffic. And you have to talk about, as I said, open space. So we actually did a new redevelopment plan. We did that in working with the SRA. And I'll show you the dates in a little bit. That was ultimately approved by the SRA so that we can actually redevelop the base, and we filed that with the state. So that was sort of the third thing that we did. And this is the plan that sort of goes along with it. The orange is sort of the equivalent of, I'll call it the hot pink that you saw in the other plans, but all of this sort of tan color is that which has been undeveloped, and then everything around the green is open space, because one of our ideas, and we'll show it to you in the vision, is to create a plan where the entire perimeter is ringed by open space. What is changed on this plan since we did it is we've now added an additional green buffer area along the Coast Guard land. The reason it wasn't there before is we didn't own and control the Coast Guard land, and that's something that we've worked with Weymouth to create. So that's a little bit about that plan. A little bit of timeline, because we think it's helpful for the board to sort of understand where we're at and what we're doing. So I gave you sort of what we have been doing, but where are we at now in the process? All right, in 2023, because as I said, land control, those issues, deals with the Navy towards the end of last year. Beginning of this year, the redevelopment plan that was ultimately approved by the SRA on March 15th. The zoning bylaw and map, we spent months working with counsel for the SRA to work through a zoning bylaw and map. Tim Sullivan's going to speak to that briefly in a few minutes, but that was approved on March 29th. Preparing technical studies to support the zoning. We probably submitted about 2,000 pages of technical studies. They are all available on the website. They are all available that dealt with stormwater and water and sewer and transportation. So that's what we did for the beginning part of the year. Second part of the year, we've been working with Weymouth. The way the legislation is structured, you submit the new zoning, communities have 90 days to review and approve to move that forward. That's legislation, that's not something that we proffered. So after we got the zoning bylaw approved on March 29th, it immediately went to Weymouth. We then had a series of, well, we stopped counting at I think 11 ordinance committee meetings, various other meetings, reviewing the zoning, working with the planning board. We got a unanimous approval from the planning board. On June 26th, we got an 11-0 vote from the Weymouth Town Council approving the zoning. So that was in June. Not too long ago, by the way, June 26th. You sit in today's time frame, July to September, town meeting preparation. Our next step is we have to move to Abington and Rockland. 2 town meetings coming up. One October 14th in Abington, and then I know you haven't set one, but our hope is that you will have one in November so that we can start a formal process. Tonight is more about information, and we're going to give you a lot of information. It's certainly the beginning, it's far not an end, but it's to give you a sense. But this gives you, and the other thing that we're doing in this time frame is preparing our MEPA filing. We have to study, and according to our state certificate that came out in 2017 that L-Star had done, water alternatives, sewer alternatives, stormwater alternatives, transportation improvements, all of which we have to file and prosecute through the state, whether that be natural heritage, through MassDOT, and I know MassDOT may not be your favorite, at least the outside advertising board folks, but based on the last hearing, but those are things that we have to do. The other thing that we're working with is natural heritage. We've been working with them on the issue of habitat, and we'll show you that in a minute too. That's timeline. So what do we do with the land? Ricardo Dumont could do this much better than I will do. I'll just do it very briefly because it's important to understand a little bit about a vision we're bringing forward. So we're going to show you about 4 slides. The land before the base, the land as it became the base, the land today, and our sort of, we call it runways to greenways, what we hope to do. So this is pre-1940. This is pre-World War II. Huckleberry Hill down here about 100 feet tall, a wooded farm area. That's what this base was. World War II comes along, They disturb over 800 acres, build multiple buildings, create this into both a dirigible and eventually an air base, building runways, taxiways, hangars, and the like. A lot of buildings, a lot of development, all to support the World War II effort. So that's sort of what became. And in recent development, which is what you see here today, is obviously for orientation. You have the T-stop, you have development in through here, you have Recplex, but a lot of the runways, taxiways, turnarounds are there, obviously the parkway as it goes through. So that's sort of been the more recent development. As we envision this space, what's our big idea? We call it the open space framework, which is you think about the northern open space, again, thinking about the pre-1940, you think about the southern open space and the runways, and how do we make the connection of creating and utilizing these. You think about just orientation, there's the hangar, wide areas down the taxiway where we would develop off of and around. You have the parkway coming through, you have the runways coming down. To give you a sense, some of these areas, and it's always a little deceptive on a map like this, are 4,000 feet long, or 100 to 200 feet wide. These are major areas of, again, how do you connect open space in this project? This is a different view. Again, the northern open space, that which has been developed, the T-station, the parkway, making these connections, connecting down to the southern open space. So that just gives you a sense of what that is. And then this is what we call the core development area. No great surprise, starting to build off of where they sort of stopped in infrastructure, moving that down, building heavily along the parkway as our main entrance, and creating another thing that's here is also a town center. One of the things from a commercial standpoint, one of the things that clearly people have focused on is the lack of sort of commercial development that is there, the lack of a town center, the lack of a place, which we've committed to do as part of the, along the parkway, as part of the development. I'm going to ask Tim to talk a little bit about zoning. The reason, and you're probably saying, well, why do I need about the zoning? Well, that's actually what comes in front of you, or it comes in front of the planning board and ultimately for board action. I'm going to ask Tim Sullivan, who's our zoning counsel, to walk you through. Now, zoning, for those of us who have been doing it for 30 years, is riveting, very exciting, maybe not so much, but I'd ask him to sort of do a quick sort of overview and run through of what the zoning is that we plan to do here, how it compares to what exists today, and how we move forward with it, and what will formally come before you. So, Jim, I don't know if you want to sit, you want to stand? I probably want to sit.
I'm happy to stand as long as.
But you probably, for TV, you probably want him to sit, I don't know.
It's fine as long as you speak up. Okay, sure.
All right, okay.
Thanks, John. So, John talked a bit about the redevelopment plan and the runways to greenways, those are sort of planning concepts. So the redevelopment plan talked about having completed areas as they are, looking at the developable area, having open space. So zoning is really the way we implement those planning concepts. So, as John mentioned, the way the zoning works, it will go through the typical process. So it will have public hearings and public meetings that come. This is intended to be an overview of it, not the details and the like. So implementing the redevelopment plan through zoning really happens in two parts. There's a zoning map and the zoning text. So with respect to the zoning map that's being proposed, there's really three things that are important to highlight. One is the existing zoning for the areas that have been developed is staying the same. So those zoning districts where development has occurred are not changing. The other thing is around the perimeter of the site that you saw in the redevelopment plan, that's one large consolidated open space district. And the third thing is that over the developable area, the area that's yet to be developed, there's one consolidated mixed-use development district, which is governed by Article 7A. So on the zoning map, really leave what's there alone, one big open space district and a new mixed-use development district for the area yet to be developed. On the proposed text, it's an amendment and restatement of the zoning bylaw, so much of it stays the same. Again, it's a means of implementing the plan. It has the same general provisions regarding authority and purpose and definitions of uses. The rules pertaining to those existing areas stay the same. Those aren't changing for the properties that have been developed. The SRA will still administer the bylaw. The way it works is towns approve it, SRA administers it. The biggest change in the bylaw is a new Article 7A, which is one place to look for the area yet to be developed. It's the Article 7A, the mixed-use development district. So just a closer look at each of these things. Paul, the next slide. So this map on the left, it's the current zoning map. A couple things jump out here. It's way too complicated. It has multiple overlays. It has multiple underlying districts. It has multiple commercial districts, multiple residential districts, multiple open space districts. All guessing at where development would occur over time, and none of them frankly being right. It's totally inconsistent with the redevelopment plan that was adopted. What's being proposed is the map on the right. So again, the three things I talked about before, these districts where development has occurred are the same districts as they are today. They're staying the same. There's one open space district in green along the edge of the site, also not showing here, John mentioned, but also extending up on the Coast Guard property. And then the hashed tan area is the new mixed-use development district. So when you look at the redevelopment plan, this was open space, this is developable area, and these are the completed areas. So that's the zoning map. The zoning text, the new mixed-use development district. One important thing here is it's one place to look for the rules for developing the remaining area. Now, before you're looking at various different places, that's very difficult for lenders and investors and buyers. They want one place they can look and say, what can I do? That's what this is. It's designed to encourage a mix of uses, commercial, residential. It addresses prohibited uses, allowed uses, dimensionals, just as you'd expect in a zoning district of this nature. One of the important parts about this district is that it adopts a package of master development plan materials. So it has a master development plan that shows the area that can be developed. That's supported by an existing condition plan, examples of amenities and open spaces and streetscapes that should be included in the development, general architecture. It shows a core development area where development would start. And it's all supported by a series of technical reports related to stormwater, traffic, fiscal, utilities. All of that is part of the zoning. And the approval process for the SRA is that when a piece of the development goes forward, it has to ensure that it's within the parameters that were contained in those technical reports. So much more robust and protective development district than is there today. And then finally, this is just, this is the redevelopment plan. So you can see, again, you can see the green spaces are on the perimeter. Here you can also see some of those green spaces, runways to greenways on the interior. The yellow where development would likely start, the core development area, and then the brown here is the completed areas. So again, that's all supported by the technical reports and studies. So that's an overview of the zoning. Again, get into more details later. But I'll pass it back to John to touch on the technical studies.
Thank you, Tim. We're not going to go through, exciting again as it is, water, sewer, stormwater, traffic. We're going to hit some highlights, though, just so you sort of know what we're thinking. None of these things are finalized yet. We still have a lot of work to do, both on the local level, on the state level, but we thought it was important to at least give you a little bit of overview on the key utilities. One thing that, and I've said this before in other presentations, and you should be aware of it, we will not develop this project incrementally. This project has failed 4 times. We do not want it to be the 5th. One of the reasons this project has failed is everybody's always looked at it as, oh, if I can get a little bit more water, if I can get a little bit more sewer, I'll build another building. Every study that we've done, every analysis that we've done, our investment that we've made in it, relates to being able to analyze the entire base and the entire development of the base and to mitigate and to address all the water we need, all the sewer we need, all the transportation improvements that have been done. We feel that one of the reasons it has failed is no one has actually taken the time, spent the money, or figured out the solutions to that. If we ultimately can't solve all of those issues, full build out of the base, we will not go forward because we've made that determination that it doesn't work. Let me tell you about a few things. Water. Under the 2017 last MEPA filing that was done by Elstar, we had to study 2, and we're still required in our subsequent filing that will go in with the state, study 2 major things. We affectionately call this the spaghetti plan. The 2 things that we're studying. The MWRA, I think most people have heard that the MWRA is an opportunity for Weymouth, it is an opportunity for the base. A few weeks ago, Fred Lasky, who runs the MWRA, actually Speaker Mariano, all came down to Weymouth. Weymouth and the SRA, and I want to repeat that, Weymouth and the SRA are going to be co-applicants applying for MWRA water to come down to this region. The problem with MWRA water, and they have plenty of it, arguably in excess of about 100 million gallons a day, is it's all up right now in the Blue Hills. None of it is down here. So these are about 8 different routes that have been looked at to bring water down to the base, bring it down to this region. Now you look at that and you say, well, wait a minute, some of these routes take you out into Randolph and back up around and over. There's about 2 of these 8 routes that I think are viable. They are routes, why would you do a plan for a line going through Randolph? Some of this is constructability, because putting a line in front of the South Shore Plaza is very different than putting it in a more rural road. So we've actually looked at this opportunity. This is about $80 to $100 million to bring the water down. Why Weymouth is now involved in this, which is historically not the case, was really the base, is that Weymouth has concluded that they don't have sufficient water for the long term. So they're looking at ways to bring water to this region. The MWRA, who has 100 million gallons of extra water, is looking to ways to bring water to this region. So that's one of the biggest studies that are going on now. It's a study, we're on a second rounds of studies and applications that have been funded by Weymouth, funded by the SRA, and funded by us. So that's what's going on, and that's the analysis. The second analysis being done is what we call affectionately the Aquaria routes. You may or may not be aware the city of Brockton controls a desalinization plant that's in Dayton, Massachusetts. It has a capacity of up to 5 million gallons a day. Brockton does not use that water. The desal plant is under an obligation to try to get additional customers. It's actually, there are 2 really viable routes. One is next to Peaceful Meadows, where Brockton has a 36, everybody knows Peaceful Meadows, so I can use that as an example. And very sad that they're talking about auctioning it off at the end of August, but let's not go there. But on the Peaceful Meadows property is a 36-inch line that Brockton has that comes straight up, can come straight up Route 18. The other place is to take the line off of East Ashland Street and bringing in up through Abington and bringing it over here. That's another source of, and the SRA has the ability as a quasi-municipal agency to be a water company. So the other thing that we're looking at and studying is the viability of the Aquaria routes. We're required to study those. We've also studied other things. Well, what about lifting the water on the base itself and bringing the water up? Unfortunately, on the base, the best numbers that our engineers can compute is about 150,000 gallons of water a day. Not nearly enough to be able to do the base. So, and the problem is none of the communities in this area have any water. And that's just sort of what it is. So the people who have water come from the desal plant and come from the MWRA. So that's what we're working on with water. Sewer is another challenge. With respect to Weymouth, it's an MWRA sewer community. But why land mattered, and forgive me for talking about Weymouth instead of Rockland, but I want to tell you this story. The infrastructure that L-Star had that was feeding the base was pumping about 300,000 to 400,000 gallons of sewer a day. The actual flows were about 85 to 100. The SRA couldn't go in and fix it because it was controlled by L-Star. So why was it important to get a hold of that? They've actually done the work on that now. That pump station and the sewer from the base, the outflow is about 85,000. We've been able to pick up almost 300,000 gallons a day by fixing that pump station. Very important. Rockland is challenged in the sewer front. I'm not telling you anything that you don't know. So the idea of other I&I opportunities, are there other opportunities to be able to do? We've actually even looked at, could you put a system on the base? Because that was one of the things that was studied a while back. The reality is no, you can't. One of the biggest things related to that is because of PFAS. PFAS was not something that was really on anybody's radar screen a decade ago. There's a PFAS plume on the site. It's one of the reasons we worked heavily with the Navy. We can't be injecting water and bringing that back up onto the base. It's not going to work. And then Abington, we're also looking at Abington gets most of it, 95% of its sewer flows are actually related to Brockton. So again, like water, we don't have an answer for that, looking at sewer. Stormwater, We have a 400-page report that's been filed. It is available, obviously, to all the department heads and others. Again, looking at the base holistically, full build-out of the base, reducing future peak runoff flows. How do you analyze making this all work from a stormwater perspective? And that's something that Tetra Tech has spent a lot of work on. So that's sort of a third leg of infrastructure. Fourth leg is really transportation. This sort of yellow bubble plan, for what it's worth, is 72 different intersections that we studied and continue to study about what needs to be developed and improved and mitigated in order to handle transportation needs at full build-out for the base. And what our preliminary studies have showed us a couple of things. One, on transportation, the original MEPA 2007 analysis traffic reports, and I'll just talk about average, sort of on a gross number of trips, talked about 35,000 trips a day. 2017, L-Star submitted a report that had about 8 million, about 14 million square feet of total development, had about 80,000 trips a day. If you remember that plan by L-Star, I best describe it as Dubai, 20-story swinging in the wind buildings with sort of man-made lakes and boats. I don't know where they were at. I mean, we are in Weymouth, Abington, and Rockland. We're not in Dubai. That is not our plan, but that sort of analyzed about 80,000 trips. And then our proposal is going to be probably about 48,000, more than 2007. And what that has told us is about 30 locations of intersections that have to be either change the timing, change the signalization, make widenings, make roadway widenings, put traffic calming. That's all part of the reports that we've submitted. So we've identified about 30 locations that have to be done. So those were probably, from the technical part, the things that we've been looking at. I'm going to bore you for a couple more minutes because I do want to talk a little bit about fiscal. As I mentioned, we went out and hired RKG to do a fiscal analysis for Abington, Rockland, Weymouth. What was a little different than we've ever had is we actually had development that had already been done and up and operating to really analyze what are the gross revenues that are being obtained, what's the tax rate, what are the school kids, how many people are there, because the best indicator of the future is to see what's being done in the present at the same place. So although I'm going to talk a little bit about Weymouth, and you're going to say, I want to talk about Rockland, we were able to use that to start to extrapolate from that and say, okay, well, how's this going to impact Rockland, for example? So first thing we asked RKG to do was to look at the base today. Obviously, all the property has been developed in Weymouth. It hasn't been done in Rockland. About 1,274 homes, 67 school-aged children, some commercial space and a sports complex. So then we said, okay, that's what exists. Analyze the future. What's the full build that you'd have out there? What's the revenue that could be anticipated, both residential and commercial revenues, based on current tax rates? What are the costs that can be derived from that? We're going to have educational costs, we're going to have general government costs, we're going to have police, we're going to have fire, we're going to have public works. Take a look at the school children. What kind of school children impacts did you look at? So we asked them to build a study for all three communities, and there's a study available of what that would be. I'm going to stop for a minute before we change, because on school-aged children, which is always a case that people bring up, the school-aged children at the base, about 67 kids for over 2,000 people, pretty low. We did not use that for determining costs here in Rockland. We went back and assumed you're building a 4-bedroom subdivision, single-family home. What does the ratio in Abington and in Rockland look like? Not what the experience is at the base. And what you find is it is higher generally in Rockland than it would be if you just extrapolate Weymouth becoming, and moving into Rockland and building there. What that does is it's going to overstate what we think the expenses will be. But one thing that we have learned, and we've done a lot of fiscal studies for a lot of communities, is we never want to overpromise, much rather overdeliver. I'll give you an example. When we did Westwood, we predicted that they would enjoy, on a net basis, about $7 million a year. Last year, they had 11.5. That's the type of, we want you to be able to look back on this and say, it generated close to its full build at what we thought it was going to, and the costs were what you had said they were, or lower. That's at what we, those are the marching orders that we gave to RKG. So if you go to the next slide, okay. Now, again, this is Weymouth, I apologize for that, we're not in Rockland, but it is a good indicator because it exists. So again, same parameters, 274 homes, all that. The total assessed value, about 403 million. Gross taxes at 5.3 million. There are certain offsets. It's almost $1 million worth of expenses when you add up school kids and general costs and police and fire. We studied number of calls and percentage increase, so it did all that. And there are also bond payments, because there's a big parkway that runs through it, and their bond payments are required. But the net positive revenues to Weymouth are $3.2 million. You're taking into account all the expenses, the revenues, based on the facts on the ground. That project in Weymouth, on a net basis, returns to the community about $3.2 million. Why that matters is we then ask them to look at the same thing and project out for Rockland. Now, these are summary tables, there's a lot more involved in this, but we asked them to look at 2 full build scenarios. We said, what if most of it was commercial? 75% of it was commercial, the balance was residential. What if most of it was residential, and the balance of it was commercial? What type of dollars would you anticipate at a full build basis, based on the acreage that we have, based on the densities that we're talking about, that Rockland could anticipate? If it's about 75% commercial, it's a little over $4 million. If it's 75% residential, it's a little over $5 million. Now, people will immediately say, well, wait a minute, I always thought commercial was better than residential. And when I started doing this 30 years ago, that was always the case. I said, well, commercial, you don't have expenses, you don't have school kids, it's all gonna be less. What that doesn't recognize is how our population has changed, how it has aged, the number of children that we have, the type of housing that is being built. That's why in today's world, and this, I would not be able to say this 10 years or more ago, but I would say it today, actually a higher residential piece can actually net more revenues. Now, I should say to you, we're commercial developers primarily. That's what we hope to bring here. We're going to start with the town center. We will absolutely do residential. We do residential. But we're heavily in the life science business. We would love to bring commercial development here. That's sort of what we do, and that's why I sort of started with sort of who we are. We want you to know that. But residential will clearly be a piece of this development without question. This just gives you a little bit of a flavor of the fiscal picture that we saw going forward at full build. A little bit, I just got 2 more slides to go, and I'll turn it back to you, Ms. Chair. Benefits are our vision. Why do you want to do this? Why do we think there are advantages here? We need to stabilize this base community. This is a place that's been without a developer for 5 years. Take a look around. You can tell. There are things that I have learned about the base. I didn't know that rider lawnmower racing was as big a thing as it is, where people actually come in with flatbeds and unload their lawnmowers and race. I didn't fully understand the Brazilian kite festivals as much as I do today, and that's why we're increasing some of the security and the like that's out there. It is not good to have heavily paved, impervious, large-scale surfaces without any people really monitoring what's going on. There are issues out there. I talked a little bit about the infrastructure, the aging of the infrastructure, the need for some of the work's been done. You need to stabilize this base community. Secondly, I mentioned some deficiencies related to the L-Star foreclosure. They've been gone now for 5 years. Talked a little bit about some of the infrastructure, water, sewer. That's only going to get worse. That's not going to get better. All the local state permits, they're all, well, a technical term, they're all screwed up. You look at Route 18, the MassDOT permit for Route 18 talks about 500 vehicles going out on Route 18. There are already 1,274 homes there. That's just an example of all the problems. Natural heritage is in default, DEP is in default, MassDOT is in default. Everything is going to be fixed in Delta. Long-term infrastructure, water and sewers, the basic things that we've got to figure out how to bring and fix that. The open space, we've tried to create perimeter buffers and perimeter open space because we feel that's important to tie this base and the area back together. Flexibility. One of the biggest problems, and again, one of the reasons this base has failed, in the old redevelopment plan, if you looked at the schedule, they said, well, we're going to build 189 of these units, and we're going to build 193 of these, and this is the kind of commercial space, and this is where it's going to be. Whoever can tell you what's going to happen over the next decade and where the space is going to be, are just making things up. It's not real. There is flexibility in the zoning as to we can do both commercial and residential in the areas, as opposed to try to guess that, because I will tell you right now, if you say to that tenant, we think you ought to belong right in this trapezoidal shaped piece of zoning, that's where you ought to go. I will guarantee you, you will guess wrong, and they will say, no, I want to be over here. Has some flexibility to it. And obviously the fiscal benefits. At full build, as I mentioned before, $4 to $5 million. So really, as you look at what, sort of what's next, I told you a little bit about what we've been trying to do for the past, a year and early part of '23. Weymouth, we have to get approval of the zoning in all 3 communities. We did get it in Weymouth on June 26th. As I mentioned earlier, we'll have to move forward with Rockland and Abington now. Our hope is that in November, we'll have both of those done. We've been working with Natural Heritage to finalize habitat, open space, and the like. As you might imagine, they're not too pleased with all the debris piles that are in the back of this. In one of our recent site walks, one of the people from Natural Heritage said, I told them to get rid of these 7 years ago, and I'm still telling people to get rid of them. We have to address that. Believe it or not, we have may I quote it correctly, the 2nd largest monitored eastern box turtle habitat in the Commonwealth. Not if we could sell tickets for that, but that's what we have. So, and it's continued to be monitored, so we have to deal with that. I think we have a very good, and we hope in the future we'll be, in the very near term, meeting with your open space committee, so show them some of the things that we've been working on. I mentioned MWRA and Aquaria. We still have to, working on the water and the sewer related issues. MassDOT, I mentioned that. We have some upcoming meetings with MassDOT and their team to talk about the transportation improvements and the MBTA work that has to be done. Our goal is to put ourselves in a position to have final approvals mid to end of 2024. One of the things that we'll be doing, not so much in '23, but more in '24, is dealing with legislation, dealing with financing and bonding as we have to do. We have to go back and change all the legislation. Legislation talks about redevelopment plans that aren't real. It includes references specifically to the foreclosed developer and L-Star. We have to change all that. We've actually been meeting with Speaker Mariano about doing that. So that's sort of our goals for the base. We remain very excited and enthused about doing it. There are a lot of challenges to it. It's a high-risk proposition for us because, as you might imagine, if any of these things don't work out, if we can't solve the water problem in a certain schedule, we can't solve sewer, then we will spend a lot of time and effort not be able to go forward with the project. But we're enthused, we're focused. I'm working a lot, as you can tell, I hope you can tell, on the various things so that we can move this project forward and move the base forward to sort of its next phase of development. So, Mr. Chairman, with that, I will stop and certainly answer any questions that the board may have.
Thank you, John. I appreciate the time you guys have taken to give us this redevelopment plan. Open it up to members of the board. Anybody have any questions? Lori? Yep.
Hi. Yeah, this is the 3rd meeting I've had where John has given his presentation, and I just wanted to thank you for making it so concise and where people can understand what's going on. And I'm a huge fan of the university park place with Wegmans. And I'm wondering if a project like University Station is a possibility in the Rockland portion of the base with a supermarket. That's my first question. And my second question is to be clear about the improvements to the Rockland system to be determined might include, it might include helping out with our current wastewater treatment plant. From what I heard, it's kind of hard to hear sometimes over Zoom, but from what I understand, it's not possible to build a second wastewater treatment plant on the base. So is it possible to help with the financing to make improvements at our current wastewater treatment plant? And those are my 2 questions.
Through Mr. Chair,
By all
answer.
means.
I'll start maybe with the second one on wastewater. One of the things that we've looked at, talked to some of the department folks, a lot more work has to be done. People smarter than I am who are working on it is, are there improvements that could be made to the system, dollars that could be spent to be able to create gallonage opportunities? Are there alternatives? There's not an alternative of actually, which was one of the things that was looked at years ago, building on the base, primarily related to the PFAS and injecting into that, into the plume that's there. That's not a possibility. So what can we do to help support where Rockland and make improvements? Other things that we can do are absolutely on the table for what we're looking at, including how we might be able to fund that so that we can create gallonage for the community and for the base part of the development. Second piece, commercial development. We've agreed that we would do a town center, exactly where that's going to be, in one of the early things that we would do. A lot of the people who bought at the base sort of, had seen the plans and sort of, placed, and I know it sounds a little silly, a place to get a cup of coffee, to actually drop off, laundry. Those things don't really exist there. They should exist. The current population wouldn't support a Wegmans-esque kind of market, but that doesn't mean, we have identified at least 3 large commercial sort of nodes and acreage, one of which in Rockland that we could do, so we are looking at that. I think we're a little early in anticipating sort of where that will go, but it is absolutely on our radar screen. Again, that's what we do, so we're very focused on doing those 2 things. So that's wastewater and the commercial zone.
Okay, great, thank you. Just to let you know that Rockland is unusual because we don't have a supermarket. That's like one of the #1 things residents have been vying for years. So just thought I'd throw that out there.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you, Art. Anybody else?
Hi.
Tiffany?
First of all, thank you for this comprehensive overview, and I want to thank Tom and Kelly for the introduction and all of the work that everybody's put into this. I really appreciate the, overview of the total project instead of looking at the piecemeal fashion. And what really made an impact to me is, in terms of you're speaking about the smart growth and the placemaking. And I'm just curious, I work in real estate. These days in real time, everything's changing so quickly. And so I appreciate you're saying you're allowing flexibility because it's all changing so fast. And I'm just curious, could you just share a little bit about how do you kind of perceive, I appreciate how you look at the whole parcel, but how do you perceive the needs of the space with everything happening so quickly?
Sure. I think probably a couple of things. They perceived, they being L-Star back in 2017, and had filed, as I mentioned, about 13, 14 million square feet. They perceived about an 8 million square foot commercial development. We don't think, overall on the entire business, we don't think that's real. We don't think there's a market for it. We think there is a market for a couple million square feet of commercial space in here of varying types. We think that, and whether that be a combination of retail, or also, as I mentioned, in the life science business. One of the challenges you have with the life science industry is 2 things they want. They want gas and they want water. We have gas, well, not so much on the water. So I mean, it is not, it's interesting, it is not a lack of interest in the base from commercial development for residential development. It's not lack of interest, because everybody, I think, would acknowledge there's a significant need for housing, and generally in Massachusetts. This is 14 miles out of Boston. We got a T station, makes a lot of sense. 14 miles out of Boston, T station also makes a lot of sense for commercial development. So it's not a lack of interest, it's a lack of our ability to be able to move forward because we don't have the infrastructure to support it. What we're envisioning is really a combination. We think housing, as you might imagine when we sort of showed the runways to greenways, envisioning, if you can kind of think of, now don't laugh at me, sort of Comm Ave in Boston and sort of the width of that, and that sort of, think about that as the main meadow coming off the hangar. We would probably do, 3, 4 story, you could do some, nice multi-family housing, you could do some apartments, sort of, nicer stacked townhomes, things along that edge that sort of creates a place that comes out to a town center that's out there. So you could imagine how that would go. As you go further away from that, further away from the parkway, you could imagine, duplexes, single-family homes, that type of thing as you look at. So that's sort of a housing standpoint. In the commercial piece, if you think about coming off of 3, coming in 228, where you sort of hit Rockland first, you sort of see, okay, right off the parkway is commercial opportunity that's there. Up on Shea, probably some commercial opportunity that's there, could also be there. If you think about over onto Abington, more on that side, you think about some commercial opportunity that could be there. So we're sort of looking at all of those areas and sort of curating where things should go, because obviously you got to keep some of your commercial separate from your residential, so the experience. But sort of our first thing, the commercial, will be creating that. I mean, we sort of called it the town center, the place that you sort of have where people can sort of go and congregate and have a green space and sort of make that connection. That's probably the first thing that we're going to do. Again, we've had interest in sort of straight commercial and the bio life science folks who wouldn't mind building a facility. But again, we have to figure out the infrastructure piece to be able to do that. That's a slightly different project. That's probably weighting it a little bit more commercial. We have a lot of interest in as I said, in the townhomes, all of those asset, that sounds too corporate, but there's sort of, people call them asset classes. I mean, as you know, the real estate business, but they're really different kind of home types that people, want to experience, and there is absolutely a demand for that. So we're going to try to offer as many different types of homes to the extent of the residential, and keep a very open mind about the different types of commercial that would go in. We don't think, for example, there's a big office market. It just isn't. We've struggled. If you think about the office market, why did one of the first suburban areas become Waltham? Well, guess what? The CEOs happened to live in Wellesley, in Weston, in Sudbury. And that was a big piece of sort of when you moved out of the city where they went. It sort of jumped down to sort of the Newton area. We think of TripAdvisor and sort of what's going on there, Children's Hospital and different things. That started to get developed, and that sort of area started to bleed down. We've actually brought it down to University Station, which is Citizens Regional Headquarters, our new Dana-Farber facility, our new Brigham facility, sort of moving that further down. Now, why logically can't that continue down as you start to move into Quincy, Braintree, Weymouth, Abington, Rockland, is sort of the next piece. We think there is some there. Traditionally on the South Shore, it's been more focused on businesses that might have been homegrown from here and the like in the office market. So we think the office market is kind of light. We think that some of the bio life science market, this is a real opportunity for that. So those are and we also think there's retail opportunity. That's a lot of what we do. And we have a whole group that sort of looks at that. So that's what we sort of see. Much longer-winded answer than you wanted, but I mean that's just to kind of see what we're struggling with and what we're looking at is what's that vision for the whole base as you look at it. Because again, we got developable acres. We got a lot. You don't find that would split up between the three communities, but on a net basis after roads, you're talking 300-400 acres of available land for development. A lot of it is open space. I mean, we've got 1,400 acres, but a lot of it's open space. Some of it's developed, but we got a lot. So, hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Anybody else?
On the housing front, affordable housing, I'm assuming that's going to be part of the mix in what you're thinking about, right?
Yeah, actually, in the legislation, there's a requirement that there be affordable housing. The legislation, and traditionally it has spoken to a combination of what I'll call traditional affordable housing and what they would call workforce housing, which is engendering the higher percentage of more than 80 to 120% as opposed to 60 to 80. So that is actually mandated to be part of the project. So, and we did agree that we would put that in all phases of the project, and that means it has to be equally dispersed, regardless of what the housing type might be. We would have affordable housing.
Okay.
Donna, any questions? You good? All right, so I just have a couple questions, and I might be opening up the proverbial Pandora's box here, but John, if you could go back to page 29 on the slide, or Doug, if you, whoever's running that. So I have the Open Space Committee here, and I'm sure you guys are going to be having a separate meeting with the Open Space Committee, because I understand they have a lot of questions. But one of the things that I just wanted to point out before we get too much further along, on this map, that area that is, I guess you could, maybe gray with the lines or whatever in that section along the open space there. I know you guys haven't gotten to that point necessarily yet, but for the most part, isn't that natural heritage?
Mr. Chairman, we have a few other slides, if you'd like us to call them up.
If you could.
It's gonna be a little bit to explain it, but happy to do that.
I just like to do that
Sure.
just to alleviate some concerns of some people in the audience potentially, so
Yeah.
it doesn't go into the community as a concern.
Yeah,
as
no,
well.
there's been a bit of misinformation, I have to say, that's been out there a little bit about it, but let's talk about sort of what the facts are. There's a 2009 Natural Heritage permit. What you see up there and what you see in green is what the restriction is with natural heritage. That is from 2009. What that shows is, and you can see where the property lines are for Abington, Weymouth, and Rockland. This was anticipated to be a golf course, and that's what the 2009, and this whole area was going to be developed for a golf course. It was going to have a clubhouse, it was going to have parking in it, and this was going to be the restricted land. Okay, that is actually what exists today. Now, it is in default. No great surprise, L-Star didn't pay its escrow account, didn't do any of the work they were supposed to do. So that's actually but that's what the permit says today. Okay. So advance to 2017. There was a filing made in 2017. And probably the biggest change, you can see sort of the golf course outline, was the idea of removing the golf course and creating some additional developable land in both Rockland and Abington, sort of the area that you see in the white. And that was what was filed in 2017. But in typical L-Star fashion, and I don't mean to be mean to them, but I will.
You can be.
Yeah, I really.
Yeah, they burned the town. You can.
They really did.
Yep.
They were burned and pillaged. So they never finished the conservation restriction. Natural Heritage agreed with the idea of the new line, but that was actually never finished and completed. Now, one of the things and the reason why I mentioned the turtles and the habitat is, they don't necessarily always stay in a straight line, and they don't always be where they should be. So, but that was the 2017. Now, what we're proposing, which we're going to go to next, is a little bit different. This is a new line where everything that you see in green would be restricted. Because what we have determined is that the turtles are up in the upper region, sort of in the upper right green area up there. They actually go down towards the Tacken. Some of the land that is restricted is in fact, that is unrestricted, is actually where you have some habitat. But one of our biggest discussions with Natural Heritage is they want contiguous, controlled, restricted space. That has the highest and best value. They also want the debris piles to be relocated, because when you think about habitat, what the birds look for are wide open spaces, because when they get to edges, they're afraid there are predators that are sitting in the edges. So the idea of opening up that open space. What our proposal is to actually create more restricted space than exists today, and to maintain that space and to curate that space to increase the value of the habitat, both as it relates to the eastern box turtle and as it relates to some of the bird species that are out there. So that is part of the discussion that, and again, at the same time, trying to maintain at least, if not a little bit more, of what was in the 2017, both for Abington and Rockland. Because if you live with what's in the 2009 permit, there is very little land in Abington and Rockland available for development. Our sense has been, and if you think about that, if you really want to talk about proximity to a T station today, some of our lands that are closest to the T station are currently in the 2009 permit not available for development. So that's what's there in 2009. That's what exists. And you can see a lot of the land in Rockland, a lot of the land in Abington is restricted. That was intended for the golf course. Modified in 2017 to create, and then this is what we're proposing in 2023. When you look at it and combine what we're offering to restrict, plus the perimeter open space, all of the things that you see in green will either be restricted or in permanent open space. The addition to that was up on the right-hand corner where you have the Coast Guard, is actually an additional green belt that will be there. At the end of the day, we will have more open space and restricted area than exists today under the promise. That will be, and we've also talked to the state about funding the monitoring, the mowing, and the maintenance, and to create a fund so that we're sure that that all happens going forward. The idea of creating contiguous, connected, open space and restricted habitat space, as you see in the lower quadrant up through the right, and then connecting that to all the open space, is really what our focal point has been. Now, we're not done with natural heritage, so we have a lot of work left to do, but this gives you a sense, and we hope to be sitting down with open space in Rockland, because they know this is a, and they've been to many of our meetings.
Yep.
This is an important piece for the development.
Okay. Thank you, John. Thanks for setting that portion. Right, now I'm gonna completely switch gears on you, and I'm gonna go back to the financial analysis. You came up with 4.1 million being the net positive tax revenues for Rockland. What were the offsets, and how did you determine the offsets for the town of Rockland?
Well, Eric Halverson from RKG will do a much better job than I will do, but I will try to walk you through. We built the fiscal analysis this way. Start with the revenue side, start with the developable areas, for acreage, take out the value of the roads, take out the roads themselves, determine what is the net developable acreage that is in Rockland today, under the plan that we're proposing. What's the current tax rate? Determine what the density would be that we're proposing as part of our plan. Create a model that allows you to take the revenues and pivot them between what if it's heavy residential, what if it's heavy commercial, different housing types, looking at the values that are coming forward from an assessment standpoint, all to determine what would the revenues that are available on these developable acreage in Rockland. So that's sort of the revenue piece. We did not include things like excise taxes, other fees. They are included in the Weymouth numbers because we knew what they were. We know how many cars are parked there and what they get for fees and like. We did not do that in any of these numbers. So first we started with revenues. Second piece, okay, what are the expenses? People go to the library, people use election services all day. We looked at total call volume in the fire department, for example, or what's the total call volume? What do we anticipate is going to be the increase? Again, one of the interesting things that we had is, I know Rockland is not Weymouth, Weymouth is not Rockland, but if you're looking to sort of extrapolate and figure out, well, what was the increase in call volume that they had when it was built, what's that percentage, what does that look like? Have to adjust for how they really pay ambulance calls, sort of, looking all that. Look at the total budget in Rockland for fire, sort of say, okay, well, what does that mean at full build-out if you're gonna have, 600 homes there, what are you gonna have? What does that mean for additional costs that are going to be there for the fire? We did the same thing with police. For schools, we took the school children number, we looked at what you spend on schools, we looked at the incremental number, so figured that all out. We then took the number that would not be achieved from the base, because it's a lower number. We took the higher number of saying, what does Rockland experience on a household basis, and we plugged that in. So we tried to take all, and then we had sort of, what is attributable to, the population that would be there for using things like going to the library and things like that. So we tried to put costs on all those things to determine, okay, we understand what the gross revenues would be, let's put all the major cost buckets in there. What would the net number then be if you built out the densities? And then in this chart, we sort of focused it on what if it's heavy commercial, what if it's heavy residential, what do the numbers look like? There's a lot more to it than what I just said,
Sure.
but I think that when I asked them to explain to me what exactly we were going to do, and Paul and I have done this before in many different communities, that's the approach that we took to determine on a net revenue basis what could the towns anticipate if you built out the project. Those are the numbers we came.
Okay, and then I just, one last question. from a stormwater standpoint, could you just touch a little bit on where you guys are as far as removing stormwater from the base as more development goes in? Where you guys are, catch basins, if retention ponds, anything like that, that would prevent potential flooding in an already high water table town like parts of the town of Rockland.
Yeah, certainly, we don't have Bob Dale tonight.
I'm hitting you with all the questions
You
the
know,
other
they're
guys are
good
going to
ones,
answer.
but,
Yeah.
and hopefully I'm struggling through, but.
No,
it's
you're doing
okay.
great. You're doing great.
What we asked, and there's a 400-page stormwater report that he's
Mhm.
done for the,
Yep.
and his team at Tetra Tech has done for the entire base. What we asked them to do is, if you built out the entire base, all three communities, what would you look at from a stormwater standpoint? Obviously, got to reduce peak water flows. Where would the stormwater go? Can we, figure out how to, and there are different, sort of that which is in the top right sort of flows in one direction. We have others sort of from the left. We have a lot going down into the Tackin. The Tackin is serviced by two 48-inch pipes that are in varying degrees of repair. But what we looked at was both overall holistically building out the entire base. How, where would you put detention basins? He can show it better on here. Some of the areas that you see in blue are some of the detention basin areas. Where would you put those? What piping would you rebuild? One of the old plans was to, the old VHB plan that L-Star had developed, was to build throughout the middle of the site two 72-inch pipes, dig it all up and sort of run those pipes. We found that that was going to surcharge and really not work.
Mhm.
Part of this is actually dispersing the water and without taxing it and reducing peak rate of flow. So what Bob has designed is a system of basins, even the meadow areas, the sort of runways to green areas. As you get out of the most dense area up by the hangar, where actually those parts of those are going to be depressed so that they can actually take some of the stormwater flow and absorb that and treat it and deal with it. So that is an overall approach of how we have looked at it as the entire base. We've certainly heard people's concern, oh, you're already surcharging, what's happening here in the stream and the like. That condition will not exist as the way we have designed it. There are, and it goes back to the issue of the base, there's a lot of failed infrastructure out on the base today. That's not going to get any better. And, pipes collapse, and that's why we sort of started with our vision. These things were put in by the federal government to build an air base, now, 83 years ago. That's why this has to be redone. We feel very confident that we're not going to cause any negative stormwater impacts, but it is through a series of understanding. We've spent a lot of time to really understand the ground, survey work. One thing was never done on this, and this is just an aside, they never did decent survey on this site. In all the years this has been developed, I mean, to give you a sense, we spent $500,000 to survey this site, to really understand where everything was and how it worked. And when we went back and we said, well, obviously there must be a survey on this, site's been partially developed and it's been in development now for 20 years, and the answer to that was no, there really isn't. And by the way, that was true, there wasn't. We went back and contacted all the people who had worked on the surveys. And that's why when we went to do and assisting the SRA in the L-Star taking, we found 93 parcels of little slips and slivers and gores, because when L-Star was conveying land, they would convey it just, 200 feet this way, 300 feet that way, here's what you're gonna get. Without any actually real attachment to what was on the ground, what had been legally filed in the registry, or what the assessor's plans were. It just gives you a sense of the lack of attention to detail that has been focused here. I tell you that story because that's not what we have done here. We've spent an enormous amount of time to understand the stormwater, the flows, and existing conditions. So we feel very confident, and we certainly, Bob and his team, Sarah and others, can come in and give a full stormwater presentation. They'll do it much better than what I did, but it gives you a sense of sort of where we are.
Okay, so, like I had said at our Weymouth, at one of your Weymouth meetings, I appreciate the attention to detail that you guys have brought to this project, and I, again, just, caution the residents to, remind the residents, actually, that you guys inherited a mess, and it's taken the last couple of years to clean up the mess. And the mess wasn't caused by you guys. You guys are part of the solution, not the problem. And that they continue to remain positive about the project, but also exercise patience and the knowledge that this is not going to happen overnight, and that there's quite a few steps that unfortunately you guys have had to repeat over the years as a result of mismanagement from prior developer. So with that said, John, Paul, Tony, Robert, obviously Tom and Kelly, thank you guys. I appreciate the thorough presentation, all your time. We're gonna, I think, set a date for.
I was
Go
going to
right
say,
ahead.
I'll let you finish your
Go right
sentence.
ahead. I was gonna say, I think we're gonna set a date for a special town meeting.
We are, and if I can just make one kind of closing
Yep.
comment before we pivot to that, I just wanted to throw my 2 cents in, which is, you know, the devil's in the details. There's, as John admittedly said, there's a lot of details still left to be worked out by his team, and there'll be a lot of opportunity for public input. They're going to have community outreach meetings. There's going to be planning board, public hearings, so there'll be a lot more opportunity for community input and details. But conceptually, I just want to be on the record as saying how much I strongly support what they're doing, what they're trying to do. Housing desperately needed, jobs, you know, assisting our local economy, significant open space improvements, and significant new growth that's going to come to the community. So that's how I'm looking at it, and my focus in the end is primarily going to be looking at the new growth and the same kind of questions you had, Mike. I want to dig in a little deeper with their fiscal impact model to look at exactly how they're calculating some of those expenses, and especially on the fire EMS side, that's one that's a little bit unique, and I want to kind of dig in on that a little bit more, but I just wanted to publicly express my support, my strong support for the concepts that they're trying to pursue, and hopefully we can all succeed in this. And yes, so the next item on the agenda, if you guys want to stick around or not, I can fill you in later. I'm going to propose Tuesday, November 7th. Normally, I know we have town meetings on a Monday. I have personal conflict on Monday, the 6th. So Tuesday, the 7th, and when we get to that and the next agenda item, I can talk about a couple of the other warrant articles that would make sense to include on the warrant, as long as we're going to have one for the zoning.
So just before you guys go, just, you know, the Open Space Committee showed up here tonight. The Open Space Committee shows up, I think, to all your meetings, at least a couple of representatives do. They're one of the hardest working and most dedicated committees we have in town. So if you guys could, before you guys take off or before we go to a special town meeting or a public hearing, if you guys could set up a time where you can meet specifically with them, because I know they have a lot of questions and some concerns, but I think they're a major stakeholder in this, and I'd like them to have that opportunity to meet with you guys.
We very much do want to meet with the committee. They've actually come to our meetings. We're sort of at that stage of, and people appreciate your comment on patience. We sort of had to get through the Weymouth piece as the largest community and moving that forward. I think now as we begin our journey in Rockland, tonight being the first part of that, on an informal basis, I think it's really a good time to spend the time with open space.
All right, sounds good. All right, thank you guys, appreciate your time.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay, next item on the agenda, if I can find it here somewhere. Discussion of potential special town meeting Tuesday, November